Let me tell you what it's like to work underground. First, let me tell you we made good money, $4 a day. That was enough to pay for our room and board, which was about $2.50. And that gave us a lot of disposable income. And you can imagine what we spent that money on. Entertainment. There were 65 saloons in Bodie. Most of them had gambling tables with faro and roulette. There were Chinese opium dens and a red light district, honky tonks, a horse racing track. Yes, there were plenty of ways for us to spend our hard-earned money. In the Bodie mining district, miners carved out approximately 45 miles of shafts and tunnels. Now the shafts were vertical, they went up and down. That was how they brought the miners down into the mine and how they took the ore out. The tunnels went out from the shafts horizontally. Of course, what they were doing was this was called hard rock mining. They were chasing the quartz veins. That's what had the gold and silver in it. The two deepest shafts in Bodie went down 1,200 feet. One of them was called the Lent shaft, and the other was the standard main shaft. That would be deep enough for a 120-story building.
The way we worked was to find quartz rock that had outcropped. That means it was protruding up out of the ground, which may yield veins of silver and gold embedded in it. Here's a couple of examples of quartz rock that we would have been looking for. You can actually see the vein of quartz stuck on this otherwise useless piece of rock. They were looking for large sections of this underground, not these little skinny sections. These veins, once you started digging after them, could go in any direction. If a mining company did its due diligence, it would dig sample holes to ascertain if it was worth digging or not. Once some good ore was found, most threw caution to the wind and just started digging. The veins of quartz embedded in rock could go anywhere from inches to feet thick. Of course, you wanted to find those that were feet thick, as it would yield more precious metals. You would remove this ore and then have to extract the precious metals from it. We are going to focus on what it was like working mines for this program. How do you remove rock from underground? A pickaxe won't be much help. You need explosives to remove volumes of rock. First, you need to drill holes into the rock face. In the early days, it was done by either double jacking or in smaller, tighter places, single jacking. In double jacking, one miner would hold a drill bit against the rock face while his partner hammers it with a 12-pound sledge. As technology marched forward, pneumatic steam-powered drills were used in the mines for drilling. Here's a drill bit from one of those pneumatic drills. They were referred to as widowmakers due to the amount of dust they made. Miners breathed this dusty air into their lungs. Eventually, the lungs would clog up with the microscopic rock silica, and you would slowly suffocate to death over months and years of continual exposure. By the turn of the century, a better pneumatic drill was invented. It shot water through a small hole in the drill when you were using it. The water turned all the silica dust to dirty water, and the water helped cool the drill bit. This all but eliminated breathing all that rock dust. You drill several holes into a rock face deep enough to place explosives. The blaster set the fuse and cleared the tunnel. The explosion goes off, creating a pile of loose rubble. Then you shovel out all this debris into the nearest ore cart or buckets, depending on what part of the mine you are in, for transportation into the main shaft, where the carts would be lifted to the surface to begin their journey into the stamp mill for processing. This process of clearing out the debris was called mucking.
We're doing all this dangerous work by minimal light coming from candles. Here's the one I was using. Later on, better lamps were invented. You never know what's behind the rock face you're drilling into. It could be a gas-filled chamber in the bowels of the earth. Will you break into an old shaft or tunnel and fall in? If a cave-in happens, you could be trapped, injured, or crushed to death. Then there's the miner's worst nightmare, fire. Fires are common underground. They can be started by sparks from drilling or from the blasting. They may be burning somewhere in the mine, maybe not where you are, but they're consuming oxygen. You may suffocate from the lack of oxygen before getting out. All they would find is your dead, rigid corpse. Yes, mining is dangerous work. Do you know the average lifespan of a miner was 34 years? Water is also a constant expensive headache for mining companies, not to mention an extremely dangerous problem. The water table in Bodie was about 400 feet. Companies had to buy expensive, large pumps to remove water from the mine to continue working. This was a great expense and caused many underfunded or underproducing mines to go out of business. Imagine blasting into a tunnel to hit a water pocket and drowned before getting out. It happened. There are other dangers too. Your lifeline underground was the lift operator, who operates the cage or large bucket, which lowers and raises both you and the ore in and out of the mine, but not at the same time. It doesn't take much to have accidents operating these lifts, especially if the operator is incompetent, poorly trained, drunk, or simply unhappy that he's making less money for his job than you are. A tragic accident happened in 1879 when 9 miners were crowded into a shaft cage and were lowered into the Tioga mine to begin their evening shift. The lift operator lost control of the cage while it was being lowered, and it plunged 500 feet to the bottom of the shaft. 6 miners died, 2 were severely injured, and 1 walked away. As the cage started falling, he grabbed the overhead crossbar, raised himself up off the cage floor, and wrapped his legs around a miner, cushioning the impending impact. This fellow was forever scorned by other miners who refused to work with him. A few years later, his lifeless body was found swinging from a tree in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, a presumed suicide.
Another horrific event happened months earlier at the Bodie mine shaft. On a frigid February night in 1879, a miner was standing at the opening of the shaft and emptying ore buckets as they were lifted up out of the mine. Water had been removed earlier and had frozen in place near the opening. He slipped on some ice while reaching out to untangle a lift line and fell into the shaft, which was over 400 feet deep at the time. Incredibly, he had the presence of mind to yell out, "Clear the shaft!" as he knew miners were working down at the bottom. He was given a hero's burial at the Bodie Miners Union.
1879 was a bad year for horrendous accidents. In July of that year, the Standard Company's blasting powder storage bunker mysteriously exploded. It created a 30-foot crater. The incredible explosion rocked Bodie, injuring more than 40 folks and killing 5 men. 2 more were missing, presumed vaporized by the blast, as they had been known to have been in the area. It completely wiped out the hoisting works buildings and caused damage to nearby buildings and was felt as far away as Bridgeport. The storage bunker, called a magazine, was thought to be as safe as any magazine around. It was stone walls 4 feet thick and then 2 more feet of dirt around the outside. Yes, mining is dangerous work. Anyone interested?
Probably the sturdiest workers underground were mules employed by the mining companies. As underground works kept expanding, the mining companies needed ways to bring larger quantities of ore being mined to the surface. The stamp mills on the surface could crush vast tons of rocks daily. The answer? Mule power. These beasts of burden could move considerably more ore than men could. They laid rail tracks into areas of the mine being worked and used mules to haul these heavy ore carts full of rocks to lift the buckets.
Mules were often lowered into the shafts as younger animals and spent their entire lives working underground. Stables were carved out and fresh water and quality food was brought in daily. The miners knew how valuable these mules were and treated them as one of our own. We showed the animals the utmost kindness and respect. If a mule died, it was given a funeral and it was buried underground. Mules were smart enough to understand the whistle system used underground. They would know when it's break time, lunchtime, or quitting time. The mules would stop work at the sounds of various whistle blasts.
Buckets. Then there is the story of Jerry, the white mule. This story is retold here from the book Bodie, The Mines Are Looking Well by Michael Pyatt. Half-grown Jerry was lowered to the 500-foot level of the Standard Mine in 1896, working underground his entire life. A fire occurred underground and miners scrambled to safety, but they couldn't get Jerry out as he had grown too large. Days later, after the fire was put out and the repairs were done, they went back looking for Jerry. They found him dead in his stall and buried him in an area underground known as Mule Canyon. Miners are traditionally a superstitious lot and enjoy swapping scary stories. One miner was killed a day after he saw a white mule roaming around underground. This crazy story spread about a white mule that haunts the Standard Mine. Decades later, Robert Bell, one of the last folks to have been inside the Standard Mine in the 1930s, shared this comment with Mr. Pyatt during an interview. "I worked in the Standard. I never saw the white mule, but I sure heard him plenty of times. You could hear him walking around down there in the dark. Those iron shoes made a hell of a clatter, and you'd think he was headed right towards you." Thanks for viewing. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation.